Okay, we are in the last chapter of book 1. Hey, Banks, you go back and lay down. We're going to read one more chapter, okay? And then we'll go charge the phone. All right, let me take a drink of water. How are you guys doing? I'm hoping that this is helping. Like, this is my goal to help you, okay? So, let me take a drink. Okay, Rednecks and Scalawags. Job took us to his house. As soon as his wife saw us in the wagon, she started fussing. Tall and skinny, nothing but a sack of bones. Looked like she ought to been too weak to even open her mouth. But that woman started fussing when we drove in the yard and didn't stop till we left there the next day. "What you doing with them, Nick?" she asked Job. "You ain't had no money to go and buy notin', and you sure ain't got nerve enough to steal none. If you brought them here to feed them, you can turn around and take them right straight on back. Ain't got enough food here for me to eat. Let them stay here tonight," Job said. "In my house?" the woman said. "Stink up my place?" It was a cabin, not a house. Old, leaning to one side. Job had even propped it up with fence posts to keep it from falling all the way down. "They can sleep in the crib," he said. "That's right," his wife said. "Ain't got nothing else in there. No corn, no pumpkins, no cushaw, no taters. Look at this old ground." She stomped it with her foot. "Look at that garden. What garden? Where are my turnips? Where are my mustards? Look at them old dead mules. Look at this old ground." She stomped again. So from reading this, we know that when she says they can sleep in the crib, she's talking about a fenced-in area where she gardens, okay? Job told us to stay in the wagon, and he got down and started unhitching the mules. "Old no count," his wife said. "That's why you didn't go to war like a man. Talking about it ain't your war. It's their war. That's why I ain't got no children. You no count. You just no count." Then she started laughing. Job told me and Ned to stay in the wagon till he come back. We sat out there 2, maybe 3 hours. All the time we could hear that woman in the house fussing. They had a bayou behind the house, and you could hear crickets and frogs on the bayou. But over all that noise, you could hear that woman. When Job came back outside, it was so dark. We could hardly see him. He told us follow him to the crib. I had to wake up Ned and tell him to come on. Do you feel like Ned's always sleeping? Because that's kind of how I feel, like he's always sleeping. I think it's because there's just nothing else to do. It was dark in the crib. The crib was hot and dry. I could feel dry grass under my feet, and the scent was strong. Job told us to go sit by the wall. I held my hand out till I touched the wall. Then I sat down and pulled Ned side me. Job was there now. I couldn't see him too good, but I could smell him. His scent was strong as the grass scent. "Here," he said. I reached my hand up in the dark and I touched his hand. Then I took a piece of cornbread. It was wet on one end. "Piece for him," he said. I give Ned the piece I had already had. Then I reached for the piece Job was holding. He told us we could sleep there tonight, and tomorrow he was taking us somewhere else. We sat there in the dark, eating the soggy bread. It had been dipped in pot liquor that had been around a couple days. So I think pot liquor is similar to clabber. So it's kind of like, when your mom makes like a pot roast and, the bottom of the pan has the drippings and some water and it kind of makes like a little bit of a gravy. That's kind of what their bread was dipped in. Okay, that's pot liquor. When Ned got through eating, he laid down and went back to sleep. I sat against the wall listening to this crazy woman till way up in the night. The war had done that to a lot of them, drove them crazy like that. More than once I started to wake Ned up, tell him let's go. I even put my hand on his shoulder to shake him once, but he was so tired. They did a lot of walking too, and that is the other reason why he's sleeping a lot. And I was tired too. I told myself I would just sit there and keep guard. The next morning when Job woke us up, I was still sitting there against the wall. Where are we going? I asked. Y'all friend Bone, he said. I don't know nobody named Bone, I said. Job didn't say another word. We clammed in the wagon. The woman was standing in the door fussing, looking the same way she looked the day before, like she hadn't gone to bed, like she hadn't closed her eyes or closed her mouth a second. We could hear her saying no count and till we got out of sight. When Job was sure she couldn't see us no more, he reached in his pocket and brought out some pecans. That's what we had for breakfast and dinner that day, pecans. I have seen some slow mules in my days, but the two pulling that wagon must have been the slowest yet. Two little brown mules, not much bigger than Shetland ponies. You couldn't even see them from the back of the wagon, like the wagon was moving there slow and creaky all by itself. I wanted to sit on the board with Job, but he told me to get back. And good thing I did, because later that day we met up with two Sekishan horses. Before they got to us, Job told us to stay quiet and let him do all the talking. When they got a little closer, he pulled back on the mules to make them stop. He didn't have to pull back hard. See, you got some there, one Sekishon. Yeah, Job said. Can't say that they much, but you got to start with something, poor fellow like me. Feed them. They'll grow up, the Sekish told him. Will do, Job said. And y'all mind, y'all hear, the Sekish told us. They better, Job said. The Sekish rode off. Job shook the lines, had to shake them twice to make the two little mules come up. He didn't tell us who the riders was, but I knowed all the time they was nothing but Sekish. Job went on eating pecans and dropping the peels in the wagon. Looked like he didn't have strength enough to drop them on the ground, and maybe he just didn't care. With that crazy woman back there fussing at him all the time, them mules didn't care too much either. That wagon just creaked and wasn't getting nowhere. Almost sundown that evening, we stopped at a crossroad. Joe told us to get down and walk half a mile, and we was coming up to a big house. Go knock on the door, front or back. Tell the man there we need a home. But don't tell who brought you here, he said. We started down the road, and the wagon moved on. The crop was down, and I kept looking back over my shoulder at Job. I could hear the wagon creeping, but it was moving so slow, it looked like it wasn't even moving at all. Now, all of a sudden, I remembered I hadn't told Job thank you. Now, I wanted to run and catch the wagon and tell him how much I appreciate what he had done for us. My poor little legs were so tired, they couldn't go nowhere. I wanted to holler. I wanted to wave, make some kind of sign, but I doubt if Job would have heard me or seen me. The way he was sitting there, gazing down at them two little brown mules, I doubt if he even seen or knowed where he was going. We didn't see the house till we made the bend. A big white house with a gallery on the front and the side. To the right of the house, you had a fruit orchard, maybe 2 or 3 acres, maybe more. On the other side, the left side of the house, you had horses and cows in a pasture. Farther down there were the quarters. Listening to Job, I went up to the front door and knocked, and came there and looked down at me. Right off, I could see I had done the wrong thing. Job brought y'all here, he said. Who? I said. You see them steps, he said, pointing behind me. Go right on back down, march around that house, and knock on the back door. That, or catch up with Job. I went around the back, but I didn't knock. I figured since he already knowed I was there was no need to knock. I stood there and stood there and stood there, but he never showed up. Soon as I knocked, he opened the door and told me to come in. What you want, he said. Mr. Bone live here, I said. He went up to the front. A little while later, a white man came back in the kitchen. He was a big man with a red beard and blue eyes, and he had the biggest pair of hands I'd ever seen. You two spare, he said, looking down at me and shaking his head. He looked at Ned standing behind me. That one over there ain't weaned yet. I ain't running no nursery here. I'm running a plantation. Y'all can stay here tonight, and I'll get somebody to take you to town in the morning. I can't use you. You mean work, I said. That's what I mean, he said. I might be little and spare, but I can do any work them others can do, I said. I got women in that field eat more for breakfast than you and that boy weigh together, he said. First thing you'll die on me and I'll have to answer to the bureau. I don't mean to be disrespectful, I said, but if we was ready to die, we would have been dead long before we got here. You ain't been out there yet, he said. That's the only place I've been, I said. Yeah, he said. Yes, sir. Me and this little fella here ain't been doing nothing but walking and walking and walking ever since we heard of our freedom. Any of them out there can do more walking than I like to see them. You got to do more than just walk out in that field, Bone said. I done pulled my share before, I said. Tell me about it, he said. I told him. You're walking too, he said. I told him. All right, I'll give you a try, he said. But you still spare, and I won't pay you more than $6 a month. Take it or leave it. I don't mean to be disrespectful again, I said. But you paid, what are you paying them other women? Bone eyes opened just a little bit wider, like he was ready to tell me. But he remembered I was nothing but a child, a little black one at that. But if I was going to work for him, maybe it was right for me to know. 10, he said. But they happen to be women. I'm a woman, I said. Prove it there, Bone said. Not in here. 50 cents of that coming back to me to school that boy over there. If he'd wake up long enough. What are you carrying them rocks for? Sekish killed his mother. That's what's left. 50 cents to school him, Bone said. If I keep up with the older woman, I can get as much as they get, I said. I asked him. Sure, he said. He went in the front and came back with a feather and a sheet of paper. He handed me the feather and laid the sheet of paper on the table. Put across there, he said, pointing to the paper. One time that way, one time that way, so to make an X. I know what a cross is, I said. What's it for? Bone was still looking at the paper, but I know he wasn't reading it because I was looking up at his eyes, and I could see they wasn't moving. He was probably thinking he ought to take me by the neck and throw me outside. Then his eyes shifted from the paper to me, but he just looked at me like he was still thinking about something else. So I'll know you somewhere in my field even if I can't find you, he said. You'll know I owe you $5.50. $6, Mr. Bone, I said. Then I give you back 50 cents. I stuck the point of the feather in my mouth and leaned on the table to make my cross. After I made it, it looked so correct. I just stood there looking at it a long time. I started to add another little curve or a dot or something, but Bone took the feather and paper from me. I said a mark, not a book. Bone called that who had let us in the back door and told him to find somebody else to show us to the cabin. All we found in that cabin was 2 little beds and a fire half. Beds was 2 wide boards nailed against the wall like a shelf. Mattress was dry grass sewed with ticking. They didn't have mattresses like they have now. We'll talk about that in a minute. We had no table, no chairs, no benches. You sat down on your bed or you sat down on the bare ground. After I had been there a while, I got the carpenter to make me a bench. Then I got him to make me a table. That was the only furniture I had for the next 10 to 12 years. We was clearing off the land. The land hadn't been tended since the war, and weeds and shrubs covered everything. The women used axes and hoes, and the men did the plowing and hauling. After I'd been there a month, Bone came out there and told me he was paying me $10 a month like he was paying the rest of the women, because he didn't want me killing myself. I wasn't but 11 or 12, but I could do much work as any of them, and the ones who beat me had to do a lot of sweating to stay up. So in this last line, it's not beating her as in like whipping her. It's beating her as in doing as much work as she's doing. Okay, so we learn a few things here. One is that Jane stays on Bone's plantation for at least 12 years or longer. 2, she fights to get the same amount of pay, right? So don't we talk about equal pay all the time? She fights to get the same amount of pay as the other women. And when Bone sees what she can do, he's like, okay, I'm going to pay you the same. And Ned is going to go and get some schooling. So we finished book 1. We're going to start book 2 a little later. I'm going to have to go charge my phone now so I can do more reading. So your journaling maybe could be a time when you showed maturity, when you were able to prove to somebody that you were as good as you are. So that might be if you have a part-time job. It could be in a sport that you're playing, maybe you were playing against somebody that was much bigger than you and you did really good. You decide. So the other thing you could write about too is just how mean Job's wife is. And Job is so kind and so sweet. It's hard to believe that his wife is so angry, but you could journal, why is she angry? She really puts Job down a lot, and she says hurtful things to him. And the last thing is they slept in the crib, so they slept in the garden, which had nothing growing in it because the ground was old, I guess. So there's a couple different things that you could write about. Okay, I'll see you in book 2.